Okay, if you're just joining us and just giving people another minute to get on the call, we'll begin shortly. Okay, well, let's get started. So, good morning. My name is Josie McPherson. I'm the Director of Intervention at the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and welcome to our webinar on discriminatory student discipline policies and gender violence. During the presentation, lines will be muted. However, we will be opening up the lines for people to talk openly at certain parts in the presentation. In the meantime, feel free to type any questions into the chat box. So our presenters today, we have Alexandra Brodsky, she is a Skadden Fellow at the National Women's Law Center, and her work focuses on the intersections of discriminatory student discipline policies and gender violence. We have Kate McDonough, who is the Director of Organizing at Girls for Gender Equity. In this capacity, Kate oversees GGE's community organizing campaigns, including GGE's school push-out work, which centers on young women of color and LGBT youth who are pushed out of school. We also have Khadija Hudson, a community organizer at Girls for Gender Equity. Khadija's role, her focus is the School Girls Deserve campaign, which names how young women of color and LGBT youth are pushed out of school through intergenerational organizing, imagines and advocates for schools that support young women and LGBT youth of color. Welcome. And with that, let's start the webinar.
Hi all, thanks so much for having us and for joining us for this conversation. We're really excited to present our work to you and also to hear what you're seeing in your schools and what strategies you're using.
So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being on the call. This is Kate McDonough with Girls for Gender Equity. And we're just going to start off really quickly by letting you know who we are, so you have an idea of who's talking with you. So, Girls for Gender Equity is an intergenerational grassroots organization that is committed to the economic development of girls and women through education and community organizing. We work with communities to remove barriers and create opportunities for girls to live self-determined lives. We are based in Brooklyn, but do work all over New York City and also show up on the national level.
And hi, this is Alexandra. I'm at the National Women's Law Center, and we are a legal nonprofit based in DC, I imagine that we've worked with a lot of the organizations represented on the call today. Our practice is national, and we work on a range of issues to protect and expand the rights of women and girls in income support, education, workplace justice, and reproductive rights and health. I'm here on our education team, where a lot of our focus these days is on discriminatory school pushout, and how that intersects with our longstanding work addressing sexual harassment in school, particularly for K-12 girls of color. I am a fellow here, and my background is in gender violence work in schools and also in criminal defense. And so school pushout, for me, really is an intersection of those two issues, where our overly punitive responses to communities of color, including people with histories of sexual trauma, leads to reduced educational opportunities. One thing that I want to flag is that we are a legal organization, and I'm a law school grad. I've not yet been admitted to the bar, so I can't give legal advice on this call. But if you are seeking legal advice for yourself or for a girl that you know, you should feel free to get in touch with me. My contact information is at the end of this presentation, and we can connect with when I'm legally supervised. Kate and Khadija, do you want to introduce yourselves briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned before, my name's Kate McDonough. I'm the Director of Organizing at Girls for Gender Equity. And particularly education justice work is very near and dear to my heart. I grew up in New York City. I'm from the Bronx and went through the New York City public school system. I would be gender nonconforming, and my pronouns are they and them, and particularly as a young person who expressed themselves in gender nonconforming ways, definitely faced some difficult times within the school system. And at the same time, being white and just knowing the intersections of power and privilege, know and understand the importance of organizing and being at the margins and making sure that we have a holistic view of social justice.
Hi, I'm Khadija. I'm the community organizer here at Girls for Gender Equity. What brings me to this work is, like Kate mentioned, education justice is also near and dear to my heart as someone who previously worked in the school as a dean, so I was seeing young folks, particularly black and brown students, experiencing harsh discipline, and as someone who has experienced school push-out through my own schooling with harsh and excessive discipline, as well as in terms of academia and dress code and a variety of other things.
Great. So we thought that we would start off by kind of giving a scope of the problem, both on the national level and specific to New York. And so we'll run through sort of the lay of the land, but then we'd really love to hear from all of you in terms of how you are seeing school pushout and sexual harassment playing out in your community schools. So we look forward not just to talking, but to listening here. So a lot of what we know in terms of the national landscape of student discipline comes from data from the Office for Civil Rights Data Connection. And one thing that I definitely find in my work, and I imagine that many of you have seen, is that often people talk about student discipline as a boys' issue. Many people think about suspension and expulsion and they imagine, a boy acting out, but we know that actually that isn't true. So as you can see here, after Black boys, Black girls are more likely to be suspended than all other groups, all other demographic groups of boys and girls, and are more likely to receive multiple suspensions than any other race and gender group. You can see here in this graph just how dramatic those disparities are. And one issue that's gotten a lot of attention over the past year, in part thanks to the way that the Department of Education has highlighted the findings from its data collection, is that these disparities start as early as preschool. So Black girls are about a fifth of the girls enrolled in preschool, but more than half of those receiving out-of-school suspensions. And, we should all just acknowledge that no preschooler should ever be pushed out. That, means that Black girls are twice as likely to be suspended as white girls in preschool. And that disparity only increases over time. So in the K through 12 level, Black girls are nearly 6 times more likely to be suspended from school than their white female peers. And, at the National Women's Law Center, we like specifically to talk about Black girls and the particular obstacles that they face, but many of these are shared amongst other groups of girls of color, particularly American Indian, Native Alaskan girls, who are twice as likely to be suspended from school as white girls. And girls of multiple races are nearly 2.5 times as likely as white girls to receive 1 or more suspensions. And I think this probably goes without saying, but because this is a question that we sometimes get when we talk about these issues, there is no evidence that these punitive responses are proportionate to the level of actual rule breaking by students. So there is, the evidence suggests that Black girls and other girls of color are punished more for the exact same offenses that white girls are committing. And the impact of this kind of school push-out goes far beyond, the single day lost, though we all know how far someone can fall behind in just a lost class or a lost day. This kind of discriminatory student discipline leads to lost class time and also leads to students disengaging from their education. So students who are suspended are more likely to drop out, and that leads to fewer economic opportunities in the long run. We know that students who are suspended and expelled are more likely to act out after the fact. So it's not that kids who act out more likely to be punished, but actually that kids who are punished are more likely to act out. They don't trust teachers and other adults in the educational system, and they are more likely to get involved with the juvenile justice system. And again, to talk about areas where we think about boys, but really girls are so seriously affected. Girls are actually the fastest growing population in the juvenile justice system. So I want to talk a little bit about how race and gender stereotypes contribute to this problem, really undergird the problem of discriminatory push-out. So we know that there's a very strong link between self-esteem and educational outcomes. And in a recent New York study, it was really encouraging to hear that girls who had strong ties to their racial identity were more likely to be happy and more likely to do well in school. but we also have decades and decades of studies that show that negative racial stereotypes affect Black children from a really young age. And too often, and we hear this from schools across, from students and families in schools across the country, these kinds of stereotypes lead educators and administrators to respond punitively to girls of color and particularly Black girls in schools. So one thing we hear again and again is that stereotypes and imagery in the media of Black women and girls as loud and confrontational and assertive contrast with these very white and middle-class notions of traditional femininity, which require girls to be passive and modest. We know that girls of color are often sexualized by adults in their lives, are seen as sexually mature and experienced, even whether or not they are. And these images and stereotypes and assumptions can lead to harsher punishment for girls of color when they do the exact same thing as white classmates. So we often hear from girls of color across the country that they are more likely to get in trouble for dress code violations even when their white female classmates wear the exact same thing, because they might be read as more defiant or as trying to be sexually provocative. Also, many girls of color who are pushed out are pushed out for subjective offenses like talking back or disobedience, which is all about how a teacher reads a girl. And so sometimes we'll hear about a girl who simply asked a question in class. And had she been white, the teacher might have seen that as her being curious and engaged, and instead she's read as disobedient and pushed out of the classroom. We also know that many of the girls who face suspensions and expulsions are really punished for having histories of sexual trauma. And we see sort of two main sort of categories of this. So one is that girls are often punished for behavior that they have to make known to the school when they are reporting sexual harassment or assault. So there was recently a complaint filed with the Department of Education from a school, I believe in Georgia, where a girl reported that she had been assaulted in a stairwell. But because they couldn't determine how much of it had been consensual, they decided to punish her for sexual conduct in the school. You can imagine someone who was assaulted or harassed while cutting class and then gets in trouble for cutting class because they tell a teacher that they've been assaulted. We also see this with girls who are using drugs or alcohol at the time that they are assaulted. We also see, though, that in the wake of violence, many girls, including those with trauma-related disabilities like PTSD, will act out in class, which is, as you all know, really common and understandable. But often when schools have these knee-jerk or punitive reactions, they don't stop to ask what's going on. How can we help you? And one trend that we find really alarming is the number of schools, including in New York, Chicago, and Miami, that have police officers in the classrooms but no counselors in the schools.
So now we're going to move into looking at New York, and specifically with our work at Girls for Gender Equity and the work that we're going to be touching on. A lot of it is speaking to New York City. So as I mentioned before, we're an intergenerational organization, and a big piece of that, and really the folks where a lot of our work is centered on is our Sister in Strength youth organizers. So just to give you a quick background on them, Sisters in Strength is a 2-year paid youth organizing program for 15 young women of color entering 10th or 11th grade. And a lot of the program is shaped by their unique needs and interests. And this is really what led us to our work around school pushout. So we at Girls for Gender Equity define school pushout as anything that prevents or makes it difficult for a young person to complete their education. And particularly with our girls, through doing work with us, a lot of them start talking about how both gender and racial stereotypes are influencing the ways in which they are perceived in school, which then influences the ways in which that they are treated in school. So for example, you'll see 2 drawings on your screen, and these are from our from Sister in Strength youth organizers. So one is a story of a youth organizer who had to go through metal detectors every day to get into school, and one day actually missed her first period class because the bobby pins in her hair, because she had her hair wrapped, kept setting off the metal detectors, and she was faced with the option of taking them out, so taking out her bobby pins, undoing her hair, or getting in trouble. And she chose that not to remove her bobby pins, so got a phone call home and missed class. Another story here is from a youth organizer who is talking about her experience with dress code. So here she's mentioning how she loves sports, but whenever she tries to play sports, folks in her school keep telling her that she needs to cover up, that she's revealing too much, and that she's distracting the boys. And the end panel is her saying, it's their problem, we should be working with them on this, not policing my body. So these are just a few stories that our youth organizers over time had talked about it and documented, and that has brought us to our School Girls Deserve campaign, where cis and transgender, so when I say cis, that means someone, or cisgender, which means someone who identifies with the sex that they were assigned at birth, and when I say transgender, it's someone who identifies whose gender identity is different than the sex that was assigned to them at birth, so that we're all on the same page. So cis and transgender young women of color throughout New York City document their experiences with school pushout and build the vision of the school that they deserve. So a big part of this work is working with young women throughout the city, not just naming how gender and racial injustice is pushing them out of school, but also envisioning the school that they deserve. So starting to center their voices in what the solution is. So we did do a huge process on how to both document these stories and these visions, and I'm going to turn it over to Khadija, who will talk to you about both that process and the findings.
All right, so for the School Girls Deserve campaign, a lot of that started with doing participatory action research. And with that, we've done participatory action research with over 100 New York City girls in LGBTQ/GNCT, which stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, or questioning, and GNC is for gender nonconforming, and T is for trans, youth of color in New York City. The vision sessions, which was what we called our participatory action research, lasted anywhere between 1.5 hours to 2.5 hours long, and they were interactive workshops where young people discuss how they are experiencing school pushout and what their vision or recommendations are for building a school where they feel safe, welcomed, and affirmed. And the findings from our vision session, which I'll present some of it here today, but will be included in our upcoming policy book. So a big part of our school push-out findings is that girls in LGBTQ/GNCT youth of color experience intersectional violence because of their intersectional identities. And the intersectional identities is the overlapping of identities related to systems of oppression. And so what we mean by that is that because they have identities related to race, gender, class, sexual orientation, sexual identity, gender identity, their violence or the way that they're experiencing push-out, what we're specifically talking about, relates to how those all intersect with each other. And so the main ways that we've identified of how it manifests itself is through how they experience being over-policed in school, particularly going through metal detectors and their interactions with school safety agents, body policing and its relationship to dress codes, sexual harassment, how they experience it and how the school responds to it, as well as the lack of intersectional feminist curriculum in school. So a lot of the young folks that we did the vision sessions with go to schools where they have to go through metal detectors, and in New York City they have to go through a metal detector similar to an airport style. And for the young folks who participated in the vision sessions, going through that is a hassle. They have to remove their jewelry, their hair bobby pins, their boots sometimes because their boots will have metal. And we've also had stories where young girls experience having to get their underwire bras wired because the wiring of the bra goes off. And so here is a story from one of our young folks who experienced going through a metal detector and how that made her feel, so I'll share that with y'all. My first day of school as a freshman was the worst and most embarrassing moment in school. I had a nice necklace, little hoop earrings, my diamond bracelet, and a ring my mother recently brought me. Then my shoes had a metal piece. I'm guessing, and I never knew anything about metal detectors. I came from a white privileged middle school and never experienced a metal detector. So the first school safety told me I had to take off my bracelet, but I was still ringing. I had to continuously take all my belongings off. Then I was still ringing because of my shoes. Then I had to get searched with the wand, and I hated the procedure. A year later, I found myself sophomore year knowing to never wear too much jewelry so I don't have to feel like a prisoner again. So why I chose this story is because it highlights a lot of what our young folks experience when they go through metal detectors. The recurring theme of feeling like a prisoner, having to take off all of what makes them them and makes them want to express themselves, has to be removed so that they can go through scanning that's even more intense than TSA at the airport. And then another quote, I won't read the whole quote, but I'll read a portion of it, from one of our young folks, says, then one day they try to tell girls to stop wearing bras with wires in them so they can shorten time by not having to get winded by the guards. Mind you, my first day of middle school, I was scared because they made me take off my shoes, coat, and jewelry. So as I mentioned earlier, with the wearing the underwire bras, like girls are encouraged, in order to, speed up this process, that they are not to wear what makes them them or things that they need for them to feel comfortable in schools. So another way we found this intersectional violence manifesting itself in school is through the body policing of the dress codes and how young girls and LGBTQ GNCT youth have to abide by heteronormative and gender-biased dress codes. A lot of the cisgender girls have reported experiencing feeling hypersexualized, particularly if they wear certain shirts or if they wear pants a certain way. And a lot of our gender nonconforming and trans youth have reported that dress codes force them to abide by gender norms for cisgender people that punishes their identity. So a lot of them experience like you have to dress like a girl or you have to dress like a boy, and they usually mean by cisgender. So if you fall outside of that, like our gender nonconforming and trans youth did, they were punished for that. So some quotes from that highlights that is, I'm going to read two. One is, also the school dress code needs to go. It targets women and demonstrates that the education of boys is more of a priority than the education of girls. So what this young person was referring to is how in schools, girls have to cover up, they have to be modest, based off of these like white middle class feminine values, that their bodies are being hypersexualized if they show their shoulder or if they're wearing a skirt that's deemed as too sexy. And then another quote from our young folks is, as far as expressing myself on the outside, yes, they had this thing of a man is supposed to be a man. And if you look at that particular school guidelines and dress codes, boys are not supposed to wear earrings or braids in their hair. And they really used to send me home for having 2 earrings or braids in my hair. And those were the things I was sent home from. And that was a story from one of our young transgender girls who participated in the vision session. And so she is expressing how she was pretty much punished for expressing her gender identity, but her school had these very heteronormative cisgender ideals of what is a boy or a man is supposed to be like, and what is a girl supposed to be like. Also, a lot of our young folks have discussed experiencing sexual harassment in school as early as elementary school, and they've told how they not reported it because they didn't want to make a fuss or a big deal about it, or because the school climate is not supportive or affirming enough for them where they felt it was safe enough to make those claims. So additional quotes that we pulled off from that is, guys will come and grab my breasts and ask if they're real, and that was uncomfortable. So that also comes from one of our young transgender young women who at the time was doing hormone replacement and was developing breasts, and students would grab her breasts, and she was being harassed, and the school wasn't really doing too much about that. And then another one was in elementary, people would catcall me in hallways and make sexual comments. I didn't report it, though, because I didn't want to make a fuss over it. So it starts as early as, like, elementary school, where young girls and young LGBTQ, GNCT youth are experiencing this sexual harassment. But because of the culture of the school and, culture in general, makes them not feel comfortable to report it or tell what's happening. And finally, the curriculum in schools. A lot of our young folks discuss a lot of how they're not seeing themselves in the curriculum, and if they feel that the curriculum is too white or Eurocentric. So some quotes I will pull from that is, people or teachers in school don't talk about Islamophobia, but make entire curriculums around white European history. It makes me feel like an outsider. And another one that I thought was really interesting was, I feel like we don't talk enough at my school. My school is named after Thurgood Marshall, and half the students don't even know who he is. So even when students of color attend schools where they're named after, like, African American historical figures who are seen as more respectable, right? Because a lot of young folks have also talked about not learning about people like Audre Lorde or Malcolm X. They are still not given the opportunity or the privilege to learn about them.
Okay, so we were hoping to maybe for 10 or 15 minutes open the lines up just to hear if the stories from across the country and specifically from New York resonate with what you're seeing in your schools, if there are differences, and what challenges girls of color are facing regarding school pushout and sexual harassment that you've seen.
Okay, I'm going to unmute the lines now.
The conference has been unmuted.
for those who are just listening, they're asking, do these stories and statistics resonate with what you see in your community schools? Or what challenges do girls of color face in Pushout and sexual harassment? And everybody's line's unmuted, so just jump right in.
Yeah, I was trying to let other people go, but I guess I'll jump right in. This is Luce, and I'm calling from Troy, New York, which is right outside of Albany, New York, in the Capital Region. And my husband is a school teacher in the high school, alternative high school, and what we see every day is pretty much what I think it was Khadija, spoke to around how girls of color and gender nonconforming students are being pushed out. Everything from policing in the schools. I actually believe they share their counselor so that any of the counselors, social workers are shared between the main high school and the alternative high school, as well as the psychologist. And they also have metal detectors at the same time. Unlike New York, though, there's really no resources for girls and their families to speak, to help them advocate for what it is that they need. Thank you.
I'm jumping right into, my name is Elsa, and I am from Long Island, New York. And on a personal level, I grew up in Queens and went to high school that was thought to be a little tough. But obviously at the time that I was going to school, there were no metal detectors or anything. There were a couple of incidents that had happened, but it never really affected the entire school. I am Hispanic. I never really saw any discrimination toward me. Now I live in an upper white middle class community in Long Island, and my children went to predominantly white school, and obviously there were no metal detectors there. However, there was security. And they went into a Catholic high school where they're both in college now, but there was a high concentration of security, only because I think it's the times that we live in. More technology makes it easier to detect things that kids will often bring. I don't want to say whether it probably is more of a gender that do that, but it was never something that I worried about. I think ultimately being safer is better than being sorry.
Hi, thank you for your statement. So to respond to, this is Khadija, by the way. To respond to that, the feeling safer than sorry, so a lot of our young folks have reported that metal detectors and the over-policing in school, in fact, does not make them feel any safer. It makes them feel more like a criminal. And so when we have these metal detectors and these NYPD police in the schools, it's just like, well, who is this to make it feel safe, right? If the teachers and the administrators who happen to be, white middle class folks don't have to go through them, but these poor black and brown kids, the ones I've done vision sessions with, and the ones who are more likely to attend schools that have metal detectors and have a higher concentration of police officers than they do counselors and school safety officers, school social workers and counselors, have to go through all this over-policing and they still don't feel safe, it's just like, then what's the point of really having them, right? Also, a lot of our young folks have reported that these are the things that are, like, continuously pushing them out. Like, if they're saying, like, if I'm going to school and I'm going through, like, TSA intensive security training, why am I going to want to go to a school like that? Why am I going to go to a school where I feel like a prisoner? So when we're thinking of, like, it's better to be safe than sorry, we have to also think of, like, who are we being safe from? Because a lot of young folks, especially in the vision sessions, have pointed out that these extensive policing in schools doesn't actually make them feel safer at all.
I guess I was talking as a parent as far as being better safe than sorry. I rather my children be safe than, you know, having to deal with anybody bringing, you know, something into the school. It is kind of confining and you know, policing. And, you know, but ultimately, you know, I think it's just a sign of the times. And I'm not saying that they aren't, you know, black children and brown children, as we call, you know, Hispanics. I'm not saying that they are not being policed a little bit more than white children, but I think it's just a sign of the times. You know, there's definitely with social media and more technology and the whole thing, we hear more about these things now than before. You know, it could have happened somewhere else, but we didn't really actually hear about it because, you know, because the lack of social media and you know, TV and all the things that we have now. So I think we're just being more aware, and I just think it's just a, you know, a sign of the times.
Hi, this is Luce again, and I don't mean to take up too much space, so I definitely want other people to answer, but I just want to clarify two things. One is we're seeing school police officers in urban centers in upstate New York, that while we're not the equivalent of New York City and Chicago, them being big cities, we are cities. We're just a lot smaller. And while at the same time we're not seeing any presence of any police officers or any policing in any of the suburban schools that have over 500 children housed, and oftentimes have campuses that encompass elementary, middle school, and high school all on the same campus. And so while it could be a sign of the times somewhere, it really isn't a sign of the times everywhere. And so that dichotomy really sets a tone for who is eligible to go to school and under what circumstances. And then the second part is we in upstate New York don't have the luxury of dividing ourselves between black and Latinos. And so for many of the Latino Spanish-speaking kids in upstate New York who do look and are black and identify as being black Latinos, they too experience the same push-out. Actually, in many times at a higher rate, because they are very, very marginalized to where their parents don't speak the language. They could be undocumented, and so for many reasons, they just have no place to go.
Anyone else interested in sharing some insights from their schools before we move on to talking about solutions and organizing strategies?
No, not at the moment.
I have something. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a community educator for the Women's Resource Center in Putnam County, and I do go into schools. And it's this is not rooted in any study or anything, but just personal experience. I tend to find it interesting how in the communities of color, that people often identify that with high crime, at least in these areas. The schools that I've been to that tend to be less diverse, most people in the community look at that and say, oh, well, that school in general is a good school, and I tend to go to them, and it's unfortunate I feel like I see the behavior in that school, and it's not up to par in terms of the schools that are more diverse and have a worse reputation. So I think that this really resonates with me. It doesn't really have anything, to do with girls of color, but more people of color in general, and I could see how girls of color could be affected by that stigma in those more diverse schools.
Okay, so thank you everyone for those who have shared. I think we're going to move on to some solutions, and particularly we are going to start off with just talking about what the young women who participated in our vision session said that they wanted.
So a huge component of the vision sessions, as you can probably tell by the name, is creating a vision of what they will want the school they would deserve to look like. So as much as they were easily able to identify what was pushing them out, they were also able to come up with some visions and some recommendations on what can be changed right now. So as mentioned earlier, the overpolicing that they faced in school, their recommendations, and this is specific to New York City because all the young folks attended school in New York City, is pretty much having a cop-free zone, eliminating metal detectors, and one specifically is that the school safety division, if there is going to be cops in schools or some type of security, that the school safety division needs to be transferred from the NYPD, the New York City Police Department, back to the DOE, the New York City Department of Education. So SSAs, which are school safety agents, which is what we call the NYPD-trained police that are in schools, are trained by educators and people who know how to deal with students instead of people who are supposed to deal with adult criminals. So I've also done workshops with school safety agents, and they have discussed how they aren't necessarily trained to work with students. They're trained to work with suspected criminals and criminals. And so they don't have that youth development lens. They don't have so understanding where like young people are and how their behaviors or anything like that, or any understanding of being trauma informed or any of those things. So a lot of the recommendations center in terms of overpolicing is having the cops removed from school, but if there is going to be cops, having it be transferred from New York City Police Department back to DOA. Because also a lot of our young folks have mentioned, as well as in New York City, it's known that if a student is arrested by a school safety agent for misbehaving or anything like that, it gets taken care of by the New York City Police Department, so they're automatically put into the system. Another vision that they have in terms of the body policing and dress code is pretty much having something that's fair and that is sensible and reasonable. A lot of young folks have said no dress code in general. They should dress whatever way they please, and a lot of young folks have pointed out that if there is going to be a dress code, it shouldn't be heavily biased towards girls and LGBTQ, GNCT youth, and that it should be fair and equal grounding for all students. In terms of ending sexual harassment that goes on in school, the pretty common one that came up was just ending sexual harassment, and boys shouldn't be harassing girls in school. But another thing that has came up is classes on teaching students on like what harassment is and why harassing girls and LGBTQ, GNCT youth is not okay, and what can be learned, as well as kind of going along with that is comprehensive sex education, where consent and harassment is talked about in these classes, and also changing the way that schools handle sexual harassment, how they evaluate it in their school communities. And another recommendation that folks had towards curriculum and it being intersectional and feminist is that they just want to see themselves curriculum. They don't want that their history of like their background isn't necessarily an elective, but that it's mandatory so that everyone will have to learn about it. So I bring this all up to say that what the young folks are pushing out in our vision sessions is also what they've been saying in other spaces. So in April 9th, 2016, we had a Black Girl Movement Conference, and a huge part of that was the creation of the Black Girl Bill of Rights. And so these were rights that was facilitated by our Sisters in Strength youth organizers, in which a lot of, probably hundreds of young folks throughout the country actually shared what they would like, what their Bill of Rights would be, what would the community do to make sure that they are feeling safe, that they're feeling welcome, that they're feeling as our YWI recommendations that Kate will talk about later on.
Okay, hold on just a second. People are thinking that they lost audio. Is this still an issue, or is everyone hearing this? If not, they may have to. You just have to maybe have certain people call back in if they're having problems. But all right, let's continue. I'll send a note out on the chat box. Continue. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, we're still here, so it seems like the audio had gone in and out, but appears to be clear right now. All right.
Okay, great. So at the National Women's Law Center, we've been talking to students and families and advocates and educators across the country to try to figure out what are some models that are working and trying to think about what programming local schools have been experimenting with that might be scalable. And again, I know we have a lot of experienced advocates and parents, hopefully some students on the call, so we really would love to hear from you both about what isn't working at your schools and what you're finding effective that other advocates might be able to learn from. We've seen schools that have implemented implicit bias training for teachers and for administrators to help them become more aware and